Go and watch the opening of Goodfellas, the scene where the camera glides through a packed club, naming the gangsters one by one. One of those men, a heavy-set extra called Fat Andy, was not an actor at all. He was a real New York City detective, and while he stood on that set playing a pretend gangster, he was secretly working for the actual mob. That is not a movie plot. That truly happened, and it is barely the start. This is the problem with how we picture the Mafia. We learned it from films like Goodfellas, where gangsters rob, scheme, and eventually run from the law. But the real mob did something far bigger and far darker. It did not run from the system. It quietly bought the system. The police, the FBI, the judges, the juries, whole industries, and even elected office. What follows are 10 true, documented stories that Goodfellas never dared to tell. And together, they proved the corruption was worse than any movie. Section 1. The robbery the movie had to cut short. Most people already know this story. They just know the movie version of it. In 1990, Martin Scorsese made a film called Goodfellas. Robert De Niro, Ray Liotta, and Joe Pesci played a crew of New York gangsters who lie, steal, and climb their way up through the criminal world. The movie is funny, fast, and famous. For a lot of people, it is the first thing that pops into their head when they hear the word Mafia. Sharp suits, big dinners, men who act like the rules were written for somebody else. The film is based on a real man. His name was Henry Hill, and he really did run with the mob in New York for years. The crew he ran with pulled off one of the biggest robberies this country had ever seen. That robbery is where we begin. The movie shows it to you. What the movie does not have time to fully sit with is what came after. On the night of December 11th, 1978, a group of men drove up to a Lufthansa building at Kennedy Airport in New York. Lufthansa is a German airline, and this building was where they kept cargo. Inside was a fortune. The men were in and out in about an hour. They left with roughly $5 million in cash and another $875,000 in jewels. At the time, it was the largest pile of cash ever taken in a single robbery on American soil. The man who planned it was named James Burke. Everyone called him Jimmy the Gent. He was tied to one of New York's big crime families, the Lucchese family. In the movie, De Niro plays a character based on him, and on screen he comes off as calm and likable. The real man was something colder. Here is the part the film touches but does not fully face. After the robbery, almost everyone who helped with it was gone within a year. The trouble started with a van. One of the crew, a man known as Stax Edwards, was handed one simple job. Take the van they used in the robbery and have it crushed at a junkyard in New Jersey so the police could never trace it. He did not do it. Instead, he left it parked on a street. The police found the van, and it was covered in fingerprints. About a week after the robbery, Stax was gone, dealt with inside his own apartment. After that, Jimmy the Gent got nervous. He had just pulled off the score of a lifetime, and now there was a van full of evidence sitting in a police lot. Anyone who knew about the job was a danger to him. So, one by one, the people connected to the robbery began to disappear. A man named Martin Krugman had pointed Burke toward the job in the first place. He wanted his cut. He kept asking for it. In January 1979, he vanished and was never seen again. Others followed through that winter and into the spring. A man named Richard Eaton, a man named Tom Monteleone, a couple, Louis and Joanna Cafora, two more men, Joe Manry and Robert McMahon, and a man named Paolo Lacastri, who had been sent by another crime family to collect their share. He was found out in the open on a pile of burning trash. Now, here is the part that should make you stop. The biggest cash robbery in the country. Nearly everyone tied to it removed inside of a year. And after all of that, only one single man was ever found guilty of the actual robbery. His name was Louis Werner, and he was the airport worker on the inside who helped set the whole thing up. That was the entire list. One conviction. Jimmy the Gent, the man who planned it all, was never even charged with the robbery. The police were certain he did it. They simply could never prove it in a way that would hold up in court. He spent the rest of his life behind bars for other things and never walked free again. Decades later, in 2015, the law took one last swing. A mob figure named Vincent Asaro was put on trial, accused of being part of the Lufthansa job all those years earlier. The jury found him not guilty. Almost 40 years after the robbery, the system still could not make it stick. So put the real story next to the movie everyone loves. Goodfellas gives you a clever robbery and a wild, charming crew. The true version is a robbery that the men who did it mostly walked away from, paid for by nearly everyone who touched it. The film makes the mob look like daring outlaws living large. The truth is quieter and harder. They got the money, they cleaned up the loose ends, and the law mostly stood there with empty hands. And remember, this is the gentle version. This is the story that got turned into a beloved film, the one we know best of all. In a strange way, it is one of the smaller things the Mafia ever did, because robbing an airport is one thing. The far bigger question is what happens when the mob does not need to rob anyone at all. What happens when the people who are supposed to stop them, the ones carrying the badges and the handcuffs, turn out to be quietly working for the other side? That is where this gets much darker. Section 2. The detectives who worked for the mob. Go back and watch the opening of Goodfellas. There is a long, famous shot where the main character strolls through a club and points out the gangsters one by one, calling them off by name. One of them is a heavy-set man called Fat Andy. The man playing Fat Andy was not an actor. He was a real New York City police detective named Louis Eppolito. And while he stood on that movie set dressed up as a pretend gangster, he was quietly doing the real thing in his day job. He was working for the mob. This is not a plot. It actually happened. Louis Eppolito came from a mob family. His father, his uncle, and his cousin were all tied to one of New York's crime families, the Gambinos. As a young man, Eppolito chose what looked like a different road. In 1969, he joined the New York Police Department. To get in, he told them he had no relatives in organized crime, which was a lie. He was good at the work, too. He made detective in 1977 and picked up medals along the way. He had a partner named Stephen Caracappa. Caracappa was respected as well. He even helped build a special police unit whose whole purpose was to go after one of the most dangerous crime families in the city, the Lucchese's. His official job was to help bring the mob down. Instead, the two of them went to work for it. Their boss, on the other side, was a Lucchese underboss named Anthony Casso. People called him Gaspipe. Starting in the 1980s, Eppolito and Caracappa became his secret eyes and ears inside the police force. They did not deal with Casso face to face. They used a middleman, a businessman named Burton Kaplan, who carried the messages and the money back and forth. What did the mob get for its cash? Almost everything. The two detectives could reach the most sensitive police files in the city. They could learn who was secretly cooperating with the police, who was about to be arrested, and which mob members the law was closing in on. Casso had a nickname for the pair. He called them his crystal ball, because through them he could see the police coming long before they showed up. For this, Casso paid them around $4,000 a month, plus extra cash for bigger favors. Over the years, it added up to roughly $375,000. But leaking files is only half of it. and the smaller half. The two detectives also took part in the worst jobs themselves. Sometimes they used the one tool no ordinary criminal had: a badge. They could pull a car over on the street and nobody would think twice because they were the police. One story stands out from all the rest. Casso wanted a certain man dealt with, a man named Nicholas Guido. The detectives looked the name up in police records. The problem is, they pulled the wrong man. There were two people with that same name, and the one they handed over was a completely innocent young man with no connection to the mob at all. On Christmas Day in 1986, that young man was taken from his family right outside his own home. All because he happened to share a name with someone the mob wanted gone. For a long stretch, the two got away with all of it. Eppolito left the police force in 1990. Caracappa left in 1992. Eppolito moved out to Las Vegas, wrote a book about his life as a so-called honest cop, and chased small movie parts. Then it began to fall apart. Gaspipe Casso himself was arrested and started talking to the authorities in the 1990s, and he pointed straight at his two detectives. Years later, the middleman, Burton Kaplan, agreed to tell a courtroom what he knew. With his word, the case finally came together. In 2005, the two men were arrested at a restaurant in Las Vegas. In 2006, a jury found them guilty of taking part in 8 of these jobs while carrying the badge, on top of racketeering and a stack of other crimes. In 2009, they were sentenced to spend the rest of their lives in prison. One prosecutor described it as the bloodiest betrayal of the badge the city had ever seen. New York later paid $18.4 million to the families of the people who were harmed. Eppolito spent his final years behind bars and never came out again. Now take in the whole picture. The man whose job was to study the Lucchese family was secretly working for the Lucchese family. The man who showed up in Goodfellas as a fake gangster was a real one the entire time. These two were not outsiders fighting the system from the street. They were planted deep inside it, holding the badge, turning the law itself into a weapon for the people it was built to stop. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And remember, these were local detectives. 2 men in one city. The mob's reach did not end at the local police station. It climbed higher than that, all the way up to the most powerful crime-fighting force in the entire country. Far away in Boston, one agent of that force would spend years shielding one of the most feared figures in the city and telling himself the whole time that he was doing good work. Section 3. The FBI agent who switched sides. The local police are one thing. Above them sits the FBI, the most powerful crime-fighting agency in the country. If a city cop goes bad, the FBI is supposed to be the backstop, the higher power that the mob simply cannot reach. In Boston, that idea fell apart completely. To understand how, you have to start in one neighborhood, South Boston, known to locals as Southie. It was a tight, working-class Irish area where everybody knew everybody. And 3 boys who grew up on those streets ended up shaping this entire story. The first was James Bulger. Everyone called him Whitey because of his pale blonde hair. He went bad young and grew into the leader of a feared crew called the Winter Hill Gang, which ran much of Boston's underworld through the 1970s and 1980s. The second was his younger brother, William Bulger, known as Billy. Billy went the opposite direction, into politics. He was sharp and ambitious, and he rose all the way to president of the Massachusetts State Senate, a post he held for 17 years, longer than anyone in the state's history. One brother ran the streets, the other ran the State House. The third boy was named John Connolly. He looked up to the Bulgers as a kid, and Whitey, the older, tough guy of the block, reportedly once stepped in to protect young Connolly from a beating. Connolly grew up and joined the FBI. Years later, as grown men, Those three paths crossed again. In the mid-1970s, Connolly, the FBI agent, made a deal with Whitey Bulger, the gangster. At the time, the FBI's #1 target across the whole country was the Italian Mafia. In Boston, that meant the Patriarca family. So Connolly signed Bulger up as an informant, a secret source who would feed the FBI information about their Mafia rivals. On paper, it looked like a clever trade. Bulger would help the FBI go after the Italian mob. In return, the FBI agreed to look the other way on Bulger's own activities. But Bulger was no small-time crook passing along tips. He was a major crime boss who kept right on running his empire while the FBI shielded him. And Connolly did far more than look away. He became Bulger's protector. When other investigators started getting close, Connolly and his FBI supervisor, a man named John Morris, helped steer them off. In one case in 1979, when Bulger and his partner Stephen Flemmi could have been charged in a race-fixing scheme, the two agents pushed prosecutors to leave them out of it. Other men were charged. Bulger walked free. With his rivals cleared out and the FBI watching his back, Bulger only grew stronger. It went well past favors. Court testimony years later showed the agents were being paid. Bulger and Flemmi handed Connolly around $235,000 over time. Morris admitted pocketing $7,000 himself. The men sworn to take down organized crime were quietly on its payroll. Here is the true cost of that bargain. While the FBI kept him safe, Bulger was responsible for the loss of many lives, including ordinary people who simply got in the way. The families of those people spent years in the dark. They had no idea that the man behind their loss was being protected by the very agency they would have run to for help. The supposed good guys were covering for him the entire time. The whole arrangement finally cracked in late 1994. Connolly learned that Bulger was about to be charged at last, so he tipped him off. He warned Bulger to run before the arrest could happen. And Bulger ran. He then vanished for 16 years. He landed on the FBI's most wanted list, which meant the same agency that once protected him was now chasing him around the world. He was finally found in 2011, living quietly in an apartment in Santa Monica, California, an old man hiding in plain sight. In 2013, a jury found Whitey Bulger guilty of a long list of crimes and ruled that he had taken part in the loss of 11 people's lives. He was sentenced to 2 life terms in prison. His FBI protector did not get away clean either. John Connolly was found guilty of racketeering in 2002 and sent to prison. Later, he was convicted in connection with the loss of a businessman's life back in 1982, a man Connolly had warned the gang about. That second conviction was overturned on a legal technicality in 2014, but the racketeering conviction held. An FBI agent went to prison for working for the mob. This is the part that goes far beyond any movie. Goodfellas shows criminals trying to dodge the law. What happened in Boston is the law itself joining the criminals. The agency that finally broke the back of the American Mafia inside courtrooms was, at the very same time, keeping a dangerous crime boss safe, feeding him secrets, and leaving him free to do harm for years on end. But say the law does catch up with you anyway. Say you get arrested, charged, and marched into a courtroom to stand in front of a judge. Surely that is the one place the mob cannot follow. Except in one American city, the man in the black robe, the judge himself, was quietly taking the mob's cash to make their problems disappear. Section 4. The Judge Who Was for Sale. So the law catches up with you. You are arrested and brought to court. Standing in front of you is a judge in a black robe, the one person whose entire job is to be fair, to weigh the facts and nothing else. The courtroom is supposed to be the one room that money cannot buy. In Chicago, for years, that room had a price. His name was Thomas Maloney. For a long time, he looked like the last man on earth the mob could ever touch. He sat as a judge in Cook County, which covers Chicago, and he handled some of the most serious cases in the city. He carried a reputation as a hard, strict judge, the kind who handed down the heaviest sentences he could find. People were afraid to stand in front of him. That reputation turned out to be a mask. In the 1980s, the FBI ran a long investigation into the Chicago courts called Operation Greylord. What they uncovered was rot on a scale almost nobody had imagined. It was not one bad judge. Judges, lawyers, and court workers were quietly trading cash for friendly rulings. The courthouse where Maloney worked had basically become a marketplace, and fairness was for sale to whoever could pay. Maloney was the worst of them. He did not just take money on small cases. He took money to fix the most serious cases there are, the ones where people had lost their lives. To keep his own hands clean, he used go-betweens, including a corrupt lawyer and a bagman who collected the cash and carried it to him, so the judge never had to touch the deal himself. The case that defines him began in 1984. Two young men were attacked on the street and lost their lives. Two members of a powerful Chicago street gang called the El Rukins, named Nathan Fields and Earl Hawkins, were charged with it. The gang did not want a fair trial. They wanted a guaranteed result. So, through their lawyer, they arranged to pay Judge Maloney $10,000 to clear the two men. Maloney took the money. But while the trial was still going on, something spooked him. Other judges in his very own courthouse were being arrested as part of the Greylord investigation. Maloney realized the FBI might be watching him too. What he did next is the coldest part of the whole story. Instead of quietly going through with the deal, Maloney handed the $10,000 back. Then he did the exact opposite of what he had been paid to do. He found Fields and Hawkins guilty and sentenced both of them to the harshest punishment the state allowed. He did not do this because he believed it was right. He did it to make himself look like a tough, honest judge, so that nobody would ever suspect he had taken a payoff. Two men were sent to the row reserved for those facing the ultimate penalty, partly so that a corrupt judge could protect himself. Now follow what that did to a real human being. Nathan Fields spent 18 years locked up, about 12 of them facing the ultimate punishment. He sat there year after year, and in 2009, after a long fight and a brand new trial, Fields was found not guilty and handed an official certificate of innocence. He had not done it. He nearly lost everything so that a judge could cover his own tracks. Years later, a court ordered that he be paid a large sum for what had been taken from him. The truth only came out because Maloney's own world fell apart. Earl Hawkins eventually started cooperating with investigators and described the bribe. In 1993, Thomas Maloney was convicted on federal charges for fixing cases, including the one involving Fields and Hawkins. He was sent to prison for years. He stands as one of the only judges in American history ever convicted of selling out cases this serious. And the El Rukin case was not a single trick he pulled once. Investigators came to believe Maloney made a habit of being extra harsh on certain defendants for the very same reason, building a tough public image that hid his corruption underneath it. The courts later allowed another condemned man named William Bracey to dig into whether his own heavy sentence had been handed down not because of the facts, but because the judge simply needed to look clean. This is the part that should unsettle anyone. In a movie, the courtroom is usually where everything finally gets sorted out, the place where the truth wins in the end. Here, the courtroom was just one more room that the mob and the gangs could rent by the hour. The judge did not only let guilty people walk away for cash. When he got scared, he was willing to condemn a man who turned out to be completely innocent, all to save his own skin. That is darker than any robbery, and darker than any movie made about one. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But the mob's reach did not stop at police stations and courtrooms. To find one of its boldest moves of all, you have to travel all the way to Hollywood. Long before the Mafia became a favorite subject for the movies, it quietly took control of the very studios that were making them. Section 5. The mob that owned Hollywood. The Mafia and the movies go together in most people's minds. Goodfellas, The Godfather, dozens more. We tend to think of the mob as something the movies put up on the screen, but there was a time when the relationship ran the other way around. There was a time when the mob did not appear in the movies. It controlled the people who made them. To see how, go back to the 1930s. America was deep in the Great Depression, and in Chicago, the criminal empire that Al Capone had built was still running strong. Now under a new boss named Frank Nitti, two men became the outfit's way into Hollywood. The first was Willie Bioff, a small-time Chicago criminal with an ugly past. The second was George Brown, an official in a workers' union. The pair started small. Pretending to raise money for soup kitchens to feed the hungry during the Depression, they squeezed a chain of movie theaters for $20,000. Then they got drunk and bragged about it in front of a Chicago gangster. The outfit heard how easy it had been and decided these two could be very useful. Here is the key to everything that came next. Brown ran a union called IATSE. That union represented the people who actually made movies happen: the stagehands, the technicians, and most importantly, the projectionists who ran the machines in every theater in the country. If the projectionists walked off the job, no theater could show a film. If the stagehands stopped working, no movie could be shot. The studios in those days lived in fear of a strike because a single delay cost them a fortune. So with the muscle of the Chicago outfit behind them, Bioff and Brown seized control of that union. Then they walked up to the biggest studios in Hollywood and made them a simple offer. Pay us, and your workers stay on the job. Refuse, and your sets go dark. There were uglier threats hanging in the background too, like mysterious fires breaking out in theaters. The studios paid. Not the small operators, the giants. The men who ran MGM, Warner Brothers, Paramount, and 20th Century Fox, some of the most powerful figures in American entertainment, quietly handed cash to a former Chicago street criminal just to keep their businesses running. In 1936, Bioff reportedly asked the studios for $2 million. Across the whole scheme, the studios handed over more than $1 million, which was an enormous fortune at the time. The mob was not in the movie business. The mob was running a private tax on the entire movie business. For years, it worked perfectly. Bioff even enjoyed his new wealth a little too loudly, with fancy suits and a flashy lifestyle that drew exactly the kind of attention a quiet criminal should never invite. But what finally broke the scheme was a paper trail. One of the studio bosses, a powerful man named Joseph Schenck, made one of the secret payoffs with a personal check. Tax investigators spotted it. They went after Schenck for cheating on his taxes, and he was convicted. To help himself, Schenck told the government everything he knew about Bioff and Brown. The whole hidden machine was suddenly dragged into the light. In 1941, Bioff and Brown were charged. A jury found them guilty of extortion and racketeering. Brown was sentenced to 8 years. Bioff got 10. But the story does not end with the two frontmen. Once they were caught, Bioff and Brown did the one thing the mob never forgives. They turned and testified against their own bosses. In 1943, the government used their word to charge the top leaders of the Chicago outfit themselves. Frank Nitti, the boss who had started it all, never made it to trial. Facing a return to prison, he ended his own life the day after the charges were announced. The rest of the outfit leadership was convicted and sent away for the Hollywood racket. As for Willie Bioff, he did everything he could to vanish. He changed his name and moved out to Arizona, hoping his past would never catch up. It did. In 1955, years after he had betrayed the mob, Bioff climbed into his truck outside his home, started it up, and a hidden device the outfit had been waiting to use finished him. Now, hold this up next to the whole idea behind this video. Most people assume the Mafia is simply something Hollywood turned into entertainment. The truth is the opposite, and far stranger. Long before Hollywood ever made the mob look cool, the mob owned Hollywood from the shadows. The very studios that would one day earn fortunes off Mafia movies were once paying the real Mafia just to keep their doors open. That is not a story the movies enjoy telling about themselves. And Hollywood was only one shining world the mob quietly took over. There was another one, out in the desert, brighter and richer still. Las Vegas, the city of lights and easy money, was secretly being drained of millions every year. And the cash that built it came from the retirement savings of ordinary working people who never had any idea their money was sitting in mob hands. Section 6. The Money Machine in the Desert. If you've seen the movie Casino, you already know the outline of this story, even if you never realized it was true. Robert De Niro plays a sharp casino boss. Joe Pesci plays his feared enforcer. The film is set in a glittering Las Vegas casino called the Tangiers. Almost all of it really happened. The casino was real. It was called the Stardust. De Niro's character is based on a real man named Frank Rosenthal, who everyone called Lefty. Pesci's character is based on a real enforcer named Tony Spilatro. And the dark secret at the heart of the movie, the skim, was real too. But the true story is bigger than the film, and it reaches into a place the movie barely explains. The retirement savings of ordinary American workers. Let me walk you through how it worked, in plain steps. Back in the 1970s, the mob wanted to own casinos in Las Vegas. The problem was simple. To buy a casino, you need a huge amount of money, and you need to pass a background check from the state. Known gangsters could never pass that check, and ordinary banks would not hand them that kind of cash. So the mob found a back door. There was a giant pile of money called the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund. The Teamsters were America's enormous trucking union, and this fund held the retirement savings of hundreds of thousands of working people, well over $1 billion in all. On paper, it existed to take care of truck drivers when they grew old. In reality, mob-connected men had their hooks into who received loans from it. The fund had quietly become the mob's private bank. Here is the trick. The pension fund loaned more than $60 million to a clean-looking young businessman from San Diego named Alan Glick. Glick had no criminal record, so the state allowed him to buy the casinos, including the Stardust. He looked like the proud owner. But Glick was a front. The real bosses were crime families back in the Midwest, in Chicago, Milwaukee, Cleveland, and Kansas City. They installed their own man, Lefty Rosenthal, to actually run the place, and sent the enforcer Tony Spilatro to make sure the operation kept humming and nobody stepped out of line. Glick later said the mob threatened his family if he did not play along. Now comes the part that gives the whole thing its name. A casino takes in mountains of cash every single day. Before that cash is ever counted and written into the official books, it gets gathered up and tallied in a back room called the counting room. The mob's people simply lifted a fat handful of that cash out before it was ever recorded. No record meant no taxes and no questions asked. That quiet theft, repeated day after day after day, was the skim. The stolen money was then carried back home to those 4 crime families. Follow the full circle of it. Ordinary workers paid into a retirement fund. That fund's money was used to buy casinos for the mob. The mob then stole the casino profits off the top and shipped them out of state. The workers whose money started the whole thing never saw a single dollar of it. For years, it ran smoothly, with millions vanishing into the desert air. What finally brought it down was patience and paperwork. The FBI launched an investigation they called Operation Strawman. In 1979, agents searched the home of a Kansas City mob figure and found something almost unbelievable. Detailed, handwritten records of the skim, written out like a family budget. The mob had been keeping the books on its own crime. Hidden microphones caught the bosses talking about the money out loud. In 1983, a grand jury in Kansas City charged 15 organized crime figures. Alan Glick, the front man, was given protection in exchange for telling the truth about how it all worked, and he testified against them. Trial after trial followed through the mid-1980s. Powerful Midwest bosses, including top leaders of the Chicago outfit, were convicted and sent to prison. By the time it was finished, the mob's grip on Las Vegas had been broken for good, and the casinos passed into the hands of the big corporations that run them today. Here is why this belongs in our story. Casino, the movie, shows you the glamour and the danger, the sharp suits and the showgirls and the rivers of cash. What it can only hint at is the quiet wrong sitting underneath all of it. This was not a gang robbing a casino the way crime usually looks on a screen. This was the mob secretly owning the casinos, paid for with the retirement money of regular working families, then skimming the profits while smiling and pretending to be honest businessmen. The harm was invisible, spread thin across thousands of people who never once set foot in Las Vegas. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But Las Vegas was only one city in one desert. Far across the country, in New York, the mob was not skimming a single industry. It was sitting like a hidden board of directors over the entire city, taking a secret cut of almost every tall building that went up. To raise a skyscraper in New York, you first had to pay the Mafia. Section 7. The hidden tax on every skyscraper. New York City is famous for its skyline. Those towers did not rise by accident. For years, almost none of the big ones could go up at all unless the Mafia said so first, and got paid for saying yes. To build a tall building, you need concrete, tons and tons of it, poured to form the foundations, the floors, and the walls. There is no skyscraper without it. And in New York, the mob worked out a simple truth. If you control the concrete, you control the entire construction business. So that is exactly what they set out to do. The way it worked looked almost like a normal business arrangement, except nobody had a choice. The big concrete jobs in the city, the ones worth between $2 million and $15 million, were handed out by the mob. They had even given a name to the small circle of construction companies allowed to bid on those jobs. People called it the Concrete Club. If your company was in the club, you got work. If you were not in the club, you got nothing, no matter how strong your bid was. And every company in the club had to pay. For each of those big contracts, 2% of the total value went straight to the Mafia. 2% may not sound like much, but across a city full of giant buildings, year after year, it added up to a fortune flowing quietly to the crime families. How could they force this on an entire industry? Through a union. A mob soldier named Ralph Scopo ran the Union of Concrete Workers, the people whose hands actually pour the base of every building. If the mob did not want a job to happen, the workers simply would not show up, and the whole project froze. So contractors paid because the alternative was a building site sitting dead and silent while they lost money every single day. We do not have to guess about any of this. Investigators recorded Scopo explaining the rules out loud. In one taped conversation, A contractor asked him why he could not just take a big concrete job for himself. Scopo told him plainly, "Anything over $2 million you cannot touch. You would have to go ask every family for permission, and every single one of them would tell you no." He said he had been through it 100 times, and he could not even land a job for himself. That is how locked down it was. The companies were not paying one greedy gangster, they were paying a council. At the very top of the American Mafia sat a group called the Commission. It was made up of the bosses of New York's 5 families, and it worked, in the words of one prosecutor, like the board of directors of a giant criminal company. The Commission settled disputes between the families and carved up the biggest money-making schemes in the city, and the concrete racket was one of its crown jewels. For decades, nobody could touch the Commission because nobody could even prove it existed. That changed in the 1980s. Federal agents hid microphones in the places where the bosses met and talked. They bugged a social club. They bugged a mob boss's car, and he handed them evidence about his own crimes without ever realizing it. They bugged the union office where the concrete deals were arranged. Bit by bit, the government captured the leaders of the Mafia running their empire in their own voices. In 1985, prosecutors, led by a young government lawyer named Rudolph Giuliani, brought a single history-making case against the bosses themselves. The idea was bold. Instead of charging them one crime at a time, the government charged the Commission as a criminal organization and put the heads of the 5 families on trial together. The case had a dramatic backdrop. One of the original defendants, Gambino family boss Paul Castellano, was taken off the board before the trial even began, removed on the orders of a rising gangster named John Gotti, who then seized control of the family. Another top defendant died of illness, but the trial pressed on without them. On November 19, 1986, the jury came back. Every one of the 8 men on trial was found guilty on all counts. Soon after, the bosses of 3 of New York's 5 families, along with the union man Ralph Scopo, were each sentenced to 100 years in prison, the most the law allowed. In one courtroom, on one set of charges, the leadership of the American Mafia was gutted. This is what real mob power actually looked like, and it is nothing like a movie robbery. Goodfellas shows men sneaking around to steal. The Commission did not sneak. It sat at the top of New York's construction industry and ran it like a company, deciding who got to build the city and charging a secret fee on nearly every major project. That fee did not just come out of the contractors. It got buried inside the cost of every building, which means it quietly came out of everyone. The whole city paid the mob a tax it never agreed to and mostly never even knew about. But the mob did not only control what got built up in New York, it also controlled what got thrown away. For roughly 40 years, every restaurant, every office, and every corner shop in the city paid a hidden price just to have its trash carried to the curb. And the people setting that price were not a sanitation company. They were the Mafia. Section 8. The 40-year tax on trash. Some mob schemes are dramatic. This one was not. It was boring, in the way the most successful crimes often are, and it ran for about 40 years. It touched nearly every business in New York City, and most of them never understood why their bills were so high. The mob had quietly taken over the garbage. Here is the basic idea. In New York, the city itself picks up the trash from people's homes, but businesses have to hire private companies to haul away their waste. Restaurants, offices, shops, every one of them needs someone to take the garbage to the curb. That sounds like a small, dull corner of the economy. It was actually worth around $1.5 billion a year, and the mob ran all of it. The way they controlled it was clever and almost invisible. The Gambino and Genovese crime families set up what was basically a rigged club of garbage companies. Then they made a rule. Every customer in the city belonged to one specific hauler, and that customer was not allowed to leave. If your restaurant used a certain garbage company, you were stuck with that company forever. You could not shop around. You could not look for a cheaper option. In the mob's own thinking, you were a piece of property that belonged to whichever hauler had you. Because no customer could ever switch, the garbage companies never had to compete with each other. And when nobody has to compete, prices only move in one direction: up. New York businesses ended up paying the highest trash prices in the entire country. By one estimate, they were overcharged around $500 million every single year, all of it draining quietly out of ordinary shops and restaurants and into the system the mob controlled. What held the whole thing together was fear. If an outside company tried to break in and offer better prices, the cartel made an example of it. The most infamous warning came in 1993, when a large national waste company tried to enter the New York market. One of its executives arrived home to find a stomach-turning message left on his doorstep: the remains of an animal, along with a note that said, in plain words, "Welcome to New York." Companies that did not take the hint had their trucks set on fire. People who pushed back were threatened, and sometimes things got worse than that. For decades, this was simply how New York worked. It was an open secret. Everyone in the industry knew the mob was in charge, and nobody could do a thing about it. The man who finally took it on was the Manhattan District Attorney, Robert Morgenthau. His office ran a long, patient undercover operation. Investigators set up a fake garbage company and slipped an undercover officer into the industry, where he posed as a mob-connected operator. For years, he wore a hidden recorder and captured the real players explaining exactly how the rigged system worked, in their own voices. The mob talked freely, because in 40 years, nobody had ever gotten close enough to listen. In 1995, the charges came down, and they were enormous. Dozens of people and companies were indicted, including the mob soldiers running the show and the trade groups that enforced the rules. Two of the central figures, a Gambino soldier named Joseph Francolino and a Genovese captain named Alphonse Malangone, were convicted in 1997 of running a corrupt enterprise. The cartel that had ruled the city's garbage for 2 generations finally cracked. And here is the clearest proof of just how much the mob had been taking. Once the cartel was broken and real competition was allowed back in, the city created a new agency to keep organized crime out of the trash business for good. Prices did not just dip. They fell by about half. The cost of having trash hauled dropped so far that New York businesses were suddenly saving hundreds of millions of dollars a year, money that for decades had been quietly flowing to the crime families instead. This is the side of the Mafia the movies almost never show, and it might be the most revealing one of all. There is no clever heist here, no dramatic standoff, just a slow, steady drain on thousands of ordinary business owners, repeated every week for 40 years. A pizza shop owner paying too much to get rid of his trash was not the victim of some thrilling crime. He was the victim of a quiet one, the kind that never makes a movie, yet adds up to far more stolen money than any robbery ever could. And the most unsettling part is that it never fully went away. Even years later, federal investigators kept charging mob members for trying to muscle their way back into New York's garbage and demolition industries, using the same old tools: the threats, the fires, the baseball bats. The mob keeps reaching for the trash, because for a very long time, the trash made them rich. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. So the mob owned the police, the courts, the unions, the casinos, the construction sites, and even the garbage. But what happened when one of its most famous bosses was finally caught and marched in front of a jury of regular citizens? Surely 12 everyday people picked at random could never be bought. Except one of them already had been. Section 9. The Juror Who Was Bought. John Gotti was the most famous gangster in America. Through the 1980s and into the early 1990s, you could barely turn on the news without seeing him. He ran the Gambino crime family, the most powerful of New York's 5 families, and he loved the spotlight. He wore beautiful suits and grinned for the cameras outside the courthouse. The papers called him the Dapper Don.
He earned a second nickname too, and it is the one that matters here: the Teflon Don.
Teflon is the slippery coating on a frying pan, the stuff that nothing sticks to. They called Gotti that because the government kept hauling him into court and the charges kept sliding right off. He walked out of one courtroom after another a free man. To the public, it looked like proof that he was simply too smart, too slick, too powerful to ever be caught. The truth behind one of those big wins is far less glamorous. He did not beat the case with brilliance. He bought it. The trial took place in 1986 and 1987 in a federal court in Brooklyn. Gotti and 6 other men faced serious racketeering charges. If the jury convicted, he was finished. So Gotti's people went looking for a way to reach the one group that decides the entire thing: the jury. They found their man almost by luck. There was a juror named George Pape, an ordinary suburbanite from Long Island.
Years earlier, at a construction site, Pape had befriended a man named Bosco Radonjic, who later became the leader of an Irish gang called the Westies, a crew that worked closely with the Gambino family. When Pape was called for jury duty and realized he might land on the Gotti case, he did not see a civic duty. He saw a payday. To even get onto that jury, Pape had to lie. The judge had handed out a long questionnaire built to remove anyone with any connection to Gotti's world. Pape lied his way straight through it, hiding his friendship with the Westies leader, and got himself seated as juror number 11. Then, the fix went into motion. Pape reached out to his old friend Radonjic. Radonjic reached out to Gotti's underboss, Sammy Gravano, one of the highest-ranking men in the Gambino family. The arrangement was simple. Pape would vote not guilty, and he would work on the other jurors to do the same, all for a price. That price was $60,000, which Gravano passed along through Radonjic. Pape collected the money in installments. When the trial ended in March 1987, the verdict came back. Gotti and all 6 of his co-defendants were found not guilty on every single charge. The crowd outside celebrated. The legend of the untouchable Teflon Don swelled even larger. And almost nobody knew that one of the 12 jurors had been a paid plant from the very start. The secret held for years. What finally exposed it was the same thing that brought Gotti down for good: betrayal from the inside. By 1992, Sammy Gravano had turned against Gotti and agreed to cooperate with the government. He told prosecutors everything, including the story of the bought juror. With Gravano talking, the authorities finally understood how Gotti had slipped away in 1987. George Pape was put on trial for what he had done. In 1992, he was convicted of obstructing justice and sent to prison for 3 years. The old friend who set it all up, Radonjic, fled the country and stayed on the run for years before he was finally caught. Gotti himself ran out of luck that same year, with Gravano testifying against him, and with secret recordings of Gotti talking inside his mob hangout. A jury convicted him in 1992. This time, there was no plant in the room. In fact, that jury was kept completely anonymous and sealed off from the public, specifically because of Gotti's long history of tampering with juries. He was sentenced to life with no possibility of release. After the verdict, one FBI official put it simply: "The Teflon was finally gone," he said. "And this time,
Every charge had stuck. Gotti spent the rest of his life behind bars and was gone by 2002. This may be the most important point in the entire story. We are taught that the jury is the safest part of the whole justice system. A judge is one person who can be pressured. A police officer can be paid off. But a jury is 12 random strangers, pulled from the public, unknown until the day they are chosen. The whole point of a jury is that it cannot be reached. That is the promise the system makes to all of us. The mob reached it anyway. A man lied his way into that sacred box for the sole purpose of selling his vote. And for a while, it worked perfectly. The most celebrated victory of America's most celebrated gangster was not a triumph of cleverness. It was a $60,000 receipt. The legend of the Teflon Don was, in large part, a story the public believed only because they never saw the money quietly change hands. By now you have watched the mob reach the police, the courts, the unions, the industries, and even the jury box. But there was one move bolder than corrupting any of them. In one American city, the Mafia decided it did not need to bribe a politician at all. It could simply become one. For more than 20 years, a sworn member of the mob sat in elected office, helping to write the very laws the rest of us live under. Section 10. When the mob ran City Hall. We have watched the Mafia buy police officers, FBI agents, judges, and even a juror. We have watched it take over entire industries, from the movie studios to the casinos to the concrete and the garbage. But the boldest thing the mob ever did was not paying off a person in power. It was becoming one. And nowhere did that happen more openly than in Chicago. To understand it, you have to know how Chicago worked. The city is split into areas called wards, and each ward elects a leader called an alderman to sit on the city council and help run things. The first ward was the most important of them all because it covered downtown Chicago, the Loop, the skyscrapers, and City Hall itself. Whoever controlled the first ward held the keys to the heart of the city. For 23 years, the first ward's alderman was a man named Fred Rohde. On the surface, Rohde was just a long-serving local politician. The reality was something else entirely. Rohde came from a mob family. His father had been a Chicago gangster from the old days, and years after Rohde left office, the United States Department of Justice stated it plainly. Fred Rohde was not merely friendly with the mob. He was a high-ranking made member of the Chicago outfit, the city's organized crime empire. In plain terms, a sworn member of the Mafia had been sitting on the Chicago City Council, voting on the laws for more than 2 decades. And Rohde was not even the most powerful figure in that ward. The real boss behind the scenes was a man named Pat Marcy. His official job title was modest. He was simply the secretary of the local Democratic group. But that small title hid enormous power. Marcy had once been an enforcer back in the days of Al Capone, and he too was a made member of the mob. He ran the first ward like a shadow government, holding court in a booth at a restaurant called Counselor's Row, which sat directly across the street from City Hall. People said Marcy controlled everything from the governor on down. Across the street from the offices of the elected government of one of America's biggest cities, a made member of the Mafia sat in a restaurant booth and quietly told that government what to do. So what did the mob do with a seat inside City Hall? Everything you would expect, and worse. Rohde and Marcy steered city contracts to the right people. They handed out government jobs as rewards. They controlled which buildings got approved downtown. And they reached into the courts. The same first ward machine that ran city business also helped fix criminal cases, including one involving a gang enforcer that was quietly steered toward a friendly judge. The same kind of corrupt judge we looked at earlier in this very story. They even planted their own people inside the police.
Rohde helped get a man named William Hanhart promoted to one of the top jobs in the Chicago Police Department, the chief of detectives. Years later, Hanhart was revealed to have been working for the outfit the entire time and was convicted of running a huge jewelry theft ring. The mob had a hand on the police, the courts, and the council all at once, all through a single ward. What finally broke the first ward was a man on the inside who decided he had seen enough. A Chicago lawyer named Robert Cooley, who had spent years helping the mob fix cases, secretly went to the FBI and agreed to wear a hidden recorder. For a long stretch, he sat in those back rooms and on those phone calls, capturing the politicians and the mobsters arranging their deals in their own words. The FBI also hid a microphone in the booth at Counselor's Row, listening in on the shadow government at work. In 1993, it all came due.
Fred Rohde was convicted of racketeering, bribery, and extortion, including helping to fix criminal cases. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Pat Marcy was charged right alongside him, but his health failed, and he passed away before the case was finished. The judge who sentenced Rohde said something that captures this whole story. "When you fix the courts and you fix the city government," he said, "what you are really doing is attacking the very core of democracy itself." This is where the real story leaves any movie far behind. In Goodfellas, and in nearly every mob film ever made, the gangsters live outside the law. They hide from it. They run from it. They fear the knock on the door. But in Chicago, for more than 20 years, the gangster was not hiding from the government. The gangster was the government. He had a desk, a title, and a vote. The people of the First Ward went to the polls and elected the Mafia, most of them never even knowing it. The Mafia in the movies is a flattering fantasy, charming outlaws in sharp suits who rob the world from the outside until the law finally catches up with them. The 10 stories here tell you the opposite, and it is much harder to sit with. The real Mafia was not on the edges of society. It was woven straight through the middle of it. The detectives paid to hunt the mob were working for it. The FBI agent sworn to bring it down was shielding it. The judge was selling his verdicts, and even the jury, the last safe room in the system, had a paid plant inside it. The mob did not just rob the studios, the casinos, the construction sites, and the garbage routes. It quietly owned them, charging a secret fee that ordinary people paid without ever knowing. And in Chicago, it stopped bribing the government and simply became it. The true danger was never the violence the films love. It was the corruption, the patient ability to buy the very things built to protect us, paid for by truck drivers, shop owners, and an innocent man facing the ultimate punishment. The movie was the entertaining version. The real one is so much worse. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.